And so I think people get very caught up and there's like only one way to do it and it's prescriptive and it has to be done a certain way, as opposed to going back to what I would call like the spirit of the regulations or the purpose of having it broadly. It doesn't mean there's not obviously some best practices or some organizational principles that you should definitely live by depending on, your particular need for a TMF. But I think if folks would stop worrying so much about what they're supposed to do or what they're not doing and instead be like,
welcome back to TMF Daily, your go-to podcast for all things clinical trials and pharmaceuticals. I'm your host, Nicole Palmer, and today we have an amazing guest joining us. Edye Edens brings a wealth of experience and expertise to the table as a licensed attorney with a profound background in international human rights, ethics, and health law. With over a decade of in-house counsel experience at a major academic medical center, she has honed her skills in research administration, FDA readiness, and clinical research compliance. Edye is widely recognized as a prominent speaker in the industry and is a well-known author. Today, we're going to be learning about the vital role of research compliance in shaping the future of TMF and uncovering the insights that Edye's extensive experience brings to the forefront. Edye, welcome to the TMF Daily Podcast.
oh, thank you so much, Nicole. I don't know if I can live up to that kind of an intro. That's a lot of hype for two shoes to fill, but I will sure try. And I'm thrilled to be on here. I love all of my wonderful colleagues and friends that are doing these great podcasts. I don't know how you guys find the time, and you guys all have like amazing equipment and setups and you know what you're doing. I wouldn't even be able to figure out how to hit record. Are you kidding? So no,
would.
I love it. There's a YouTube for that.
You have a fascinating background. Can you just share with us your story and how you ended up in clinical research?
Yeah. So I came from a family that is very deep in the healthcare space, and I did everything I could to not pursue that. I did contemplate medical school. I actually contemplated it deeply and took a detour in college that was most unexpected into the liberal arts, learned about journalism, PR, and stumbled into the world of international human rights. I learned a lot in the journalism space about the lack of free press and how that contributed and frankly impacted to healthcare outcomes in a lot of particular spaces. And what a vital role this sort of network, if you will, of individuals out there who are advocating and activating different support groups, needs, et cetera, in that space look like. And so that took me to law school. And anyone who knew me in law school would tell you, like, health what? Like, no, she was crazy about this international human rights stuff. And I was traveling the globe and I was getting into all sorts of mischief when it came to protecting individuals. In fact, interestingly enough, like I said, a lot of what I was advocating was individuals who were being in some way discriminated against because they had a status. So either maybe their sexual orientation status, their HIV status, something like that was then directly linked to them not being afforded medical care and to them having, their employment ended or being cast out of their hometown, their family had ramifications held against them. So it actually blended all of my worlds. I just didn't know it. And when I got out of law school, we were in the middle of a major economic recession in the United States. It was not a great time to be right out of school. And so I was actually on my way to the JAG Corps. I was like, look, the military will give me a way to give back and continue my servant leadership quest, and also probably won't go under in the next 4 years. Let's hope. And we'll reevaluate at that point and we'll get back on track. But this is just a really unique point in time. I mean, I had people almost up to the valedictorian of my law school who'd had jobs secured for a year and were having them rescinded. And this was just an epic time. And so I had 9 months until I was to be sent to officer training school. I had a lot of friends who did the health law program at our school. We shared a parking lot with the medical school, which of course everyone now knows is Indiana University, so kind of a large one. And they're like, hey, we're doing this healthcare compliance work and research and clinical trials. It's compliance. It's what you've been advocating and jumping up and down about and doing in this other space. And we think you'd actually be like really good at it. You're used to taking on a challenge. You don't back down just because somebody tells you no. You're used to balancing a lot of egos, personalities, et cetera. And we know you only got 9 months and we've got a 9-month consulting position. And so, what do you think about that? And I was like, okay, great. So I'm an IRB consultant and I don't know what an IRB is. Okay, great. No, I say that. And then people are going to think that IUTA is making bad hires. I don't want it to look like that at all. It was more of a, I was trusted because of my expertise in these other areas. And I had already had some pretty large international accolades in my space. And so knowing I came from a healthcare background with my family and that I was very comfortable in healthcare settings and around clinicians, I was like, look, we think you'll pick this up pretty quick and you'd be a great person to onboard and have us help through this particular project. And then you can be on your way. And I just never left. They got stuck with me for like a decade. And then I just started moving. I started moving all the way through the organization. I mean, props to IU. It's a phenomenally large academic medical center. It's a phenomenally large academic center, multiple campuses. We have multiple campuses that are, I say we, like I'm still there, that are large in size and just in really interesting demographics. So you have a medical school that's in downtown of a major city on an academic campus that's otherwise a commuter campus. It's a very unique vibe. And so understanding the different needs of their research program from a 360 perspective and all the different offices and positions that I was able to hold, it was just wildly informative and, talk about a steep learning curve. And that's kind of how I like it. And my final position there, in addition to doing everything you can think of in a human research protection program and compliance, additionally, I actually worked in their comprehensive cancer center. So really understanding a large research site and all their mechanisms. I mean, there were some really eye-opening moments where it was like, oh, no wonder you hate it when the IRB sends that letter. Huh. Okay, starting to see the other side of the coin. Got it. All right. Okay. I mean, so it was a learning curve, right? But it was wildly informative. At that point, knew I'd probably leave IU eventually and go into either pharma, CRO, some type of consulting like I did. And so I really needed to have a better understanding of the site as well as the actual regulation. And then that's what I did. I went in that direction with First Class Solutions for the last 7 years. Bittersweet, just ending that time and space. So phenomenal opportunity. And here we are, getting ready for my next opportunity. But no, it's been really unique. And the consulting space bridged from being in that AMC world and that oncology space into a multitude of other therapeutic areas, individual third-party vendors of different types of services within the clinical trial space and understanding their need for compliance, as well as actually helping support sites. I mean, we've seen such a huge uptick in the last 5 years of non-academic, non-huge medical center associated research sites. That's a complete change, which is awesome. But what their compliance looks like, what their infrastructure, their needs, I mean, that was something I didn't anticipate ever making a huge part of my consulting practice. And it was because of the timing. So, but suffice to say, yeah, it's been a really, really good, fun ride. And I have absolutely enjoyed all of it. And now it's, time to make yet another pivot and see where the next decade goes. I don't tend to pivot that much. I mean, it's not like I'm ever like not in compliance. Let's be real, apple not far from tree. But I do tend about every 8 to 10 years to sort of go like, all right, I want to try to do this a slightly different way. It's just like my organic progression. It's just how it happens.
So let's talk about compliance and the trial master file.
Oh, yeah.
So when we talk about being compliant with the trial master file, like what does that actually mean in practical terms?
So this is something I think folks get really caught up on, right? And we've talked about this before, you and I, of wanting a very specific checklist, a very specific template, something where they can go like, okay, I did line 1, I did line 2, I did line 3. Because, hey, in this space, we encourage that level of detail and that level of specificity and, almost over the top monitoring, right? Because we have patient safety to worry about. So we should be that concerned. And so I think people get very caught up and there's like only one way to do it and it's prescriptive and it has to be done a certain way, as opposed to going back to what I would call like the spirit of the regulations or the purpose of having it broadly. It doesn't mean there's not obviously some best practices or some organizational principles that you should definitely live by depending on, your particular need for a TMF. But I think if folks would stop worrying so much about what they're supposed to do or what they're not doing, and instead be like, what was the point of having this document in the trial master file? What purpose does it serve? Who wants to look at it a week from now? Who needs to look at it 6 months from now? Who might need to look at it 6 years from now? What data do they need to extract when they look at it? So like really practical, like I'm pretending I'm an auditor who knows nothing about what just happened here. And I have to come in and understand this in 2 weeks, 2 months, 2 years. Or I'm pretending I am the, quality coordinator who has to explain this to someone, except I wasn't here 2 years ago when it happened. So I'm looking through this material the same way they're looking through the material, trying to make sense of it before they figure out what's going on. And what would I want to know? Where would my breadcrumbs be? Right? Because like, to me, that's the practical piece that's lost of all of it. We get really caught up on, I mean, you and I say TMF and think nothing of it, but I think that branding and like that acronym, it gets people like jittery. You know what I mean? It's kind of like when you say IRB, people they just stiffen. And you're like, whoa, all I did is say 3 little letters. It just said 3 little letters. Like, that's it. That's all I did. FDA. Whoop, just did it again. And so like, I think that if people would take like that step back and go, you know, this is a master record. Okay. I mean, this is a master document. This is a large set of records that are going to create a trail of everything you did as a part of your trial. That's it. I know that's very overwhelming and that's a lot of documents. That's all we're talking about here. We're talking about a master record from day one to day end so that anyone and everyone could reconstruct, reproduce, find out more information about, double check safety, whatever it might be in that period of time. And so, yes, it's daunting. It's a super broad definition, but it's not end of the world. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's not complicated. I didn't just say, okay, I'm going to need you to navigate space and time and get us into the 5th dimension. Like, we're talking about, at the end of the day, paper, now obviously in an electronic world, that is going to be well organized and appropriately positioned to create a trail of breadcrumbs. That's it, right? Like, that's not really that complicated. Now, the more complicated your trial gets, yeah, the more complicated your files get. You know, the more sites you have, the more you're spread out at your own organization, the more, like anything, the more hands you have in the cookie jar, you know, the more crumbs on the counter. That's life. But I also think this is where technology, man, it's such a friend of ours. Like, I don't know about you, but I don't lie. I will go buy the dollar store paperbacks when I go on vacation and then like donate them before I leave because I want to recycle paper and I hate being the old person at the beach who doesn't have her Kindle and really loves the feel of paper. But when it comes to organizing a TMF, the tools you have from a technology perspective to keeping a really tight, organized structure across everything I just mentioned, oh my gosh, it's better than paper was ever going to be. I mean, it's better than anything paper could do for us. And so I also think it's an exciting time to be in this space. I mean, I kind of wonder, just because I'm exploring AI at large, like I said, spoiler alert, but like, what is the world of TMF when you think of AI? When you think of ways that you could have almost like a mini model that would redirect or that could appropriately partition in a master TMF, outlay anytime someone sent in their documents from multiple sites, multiple organizations. I mean, think about that. And it could auto-organize and it could auto-triage, it could auto-reference. I mean, the things you could do would just be endless. It's just a matter of who wants to invent it, get the money, find the right amazing engineers who can do the programming and programmers, and then do it. So I think it's, it's something that's really exciting, but it's not for everyone. I get it. It's tedious and it's painful. And I understand, like, if you've been a coordinator and you've gotten raked over the coals by an auditor because of like one missing document, you might hate the TMF for life. I get it. I get it. I get it. Like, I mean, I would say don't take it out on the TMF. That was a poor experience in an auditing situation, but like, I get it.
So what do you think like the key components of the TMF that are crucial for demonstrating compliance with like regulatory agencies such as the FDA?
So again, put on a hat like theirs. Like I kind of put them in buckets. I mean, these are really big buckets. Okay. So obviously you have to dive into each bucket, but like first there's the science. And I always do the science first because I'm not technically a clinician. Like I said, I took a lot of science classes, really strongly considered medical school, and then detoured away. And I never want to overrepresent because I know several of my colleagues who actually are attorneys and clinicians, which blows my mind. And so for me, there's a whole bucket of science, but there's many buckets within that, right? So part of it is going to be the foundational science. How have we arrived here? So making sure there's a beginning to your story. And so like, this is where my creative writing brain / science brain like merge, because I think of it as a narrative. It's a chronology. So how did the story begin? How did we get here? Where is our science in our beginning? And how did we get permission from all the appropriate regulatory agencies to start? Okay. So think of it like You're writing that novel. So when you're thinking it from that perspective, you're going to be concerned about preclinical or prior phase work. You're going to want to know any publications or earlier information about this particular test article, whatever it might be. I'm assuming we're in biomedical research. And you're going to want to track, obviously, things like the IND, the IDE, depending what market you're potentially opening in. You're going to want to make sure that you have nailed down all of that rationale, not only for what problem does your test article solve, like what's the test case use for it, but then very specifically, why is it safe enough to then be put in play, and how are you using the exact information from that science, from that early exploration or that earlier prior exploration to, in fact, inform the clinical trial design specifically, right? Like that's what we want to see. And you can tick off boxes. I mean, obviously, if you're working under the FDA, you're going to want to see the IND. You're going to, I mean, like you can go through and start making that checklist based on what kind of research you do. But I think of it as like, that's the intro. Give me the background of how we got to this trial and why we should be doing it. Like, and think of it like a regulator. Why? What about that preclinical or earlier phase research gave us enough promise? Because, it gave us some side effects too. It didn't work in absolutely every scenario. It's never how science works. So what gave us cause to continue? And always with that heavy emphasis on risk-benefit ratio and patient safety, ultimate patient safety. And then you're going to arrive at now, like we've justified the existence of this trial, we're actually opening it. So to me, it's like you've moved from this kind of conceptual idea of the trial exists, it's allowed to exist, it's allowed to occur at 40 different sites, wherever it is. Now you are one of the 40 sites, right? Now you are one of the individuals. And so you've got to track everything of how did it get started at your site specifically? From the moment that idea was planted in, your physician's head to the actual budgets, the contracts, the negotiations, the proof of training, all the way down to that, DOA, right? Of exactly who's on the trial, exactly what they're doing. I need that package.
All the moving
most people,
pieces.
right. And most people think of that as like the startup package anyway. So that's kind of an easy phase to think of, like the beginning background and like the startup, activation package, which I actually think in the life of the TMF, the activation phase is one of the better ones. People forget they need to give you the background. They just forget. Like everyone assumes that everyone knows how everyone got there. And then once you're activated and you're going and you start to have a few hurdles and life just takes its course, it's harder to keep up. But at that activation timeline spot, I think that's actually probably your peak of compliance. Like everyone's excited. The trial's about to start. You've got patients in mind that you're ready to tell it's open. You're doing a million different things to get it open. You're checking boxes. So you're like already in that mindset of recording and creating the file and getting it going. So I always urge people, if there's like one phase of all of this, to like dig in and be the most compliant or like have the most templates ready and activate them, do it there, because that's where you're going to get your most adherence and compliance. And you're going to see really quickly if you've got your background information and you have a chance to get caught up before you get too far down the road. And then you're in maintenance. And maintenance can be, depending on trials, some oncology trials follow you for life. It could be a very long maintenance period. Maintenance is going to be bifurcated and broken down on multiple different levels depending on the trial. But that's where we're going to think about then moving away from just like, how did we arrive here? Why is it safe to do the trial? Why is it safe to activate? To, okay, now drug is in study participants and it's happening. We are live, 100% live. We are 6 months in, we are a year in. And what are we finding? What are the results? So again, you still have that scientific bucket, but then you also have that regulatory bucket of, have we tracked everything that we're doing? Are we self-auditing and monitoring to ensure what we're doing? Do we have trails and proof of that, right? Are we meeting the standards and the requests of our stakeholders? And do we have audit trails to represent all of those interactions and correspondence, right? So whether that's the IRB, the FDA, the monitors from your sponsor, your CRO. So you begin to create these different ways that you are essentially adjudicating whether or not your maintenance is going well. And the other bucket you're going to look at too that shares that scientific and regulatory overlap is going to be, any adverse events, any protocol deviations, and making sure that you're having real-time observation to catch problems before they become big problems. Then you're at usually not necessarily a closeout phase. It kind of depends on the nature of the trial, but you might at least be at a publication phase, or like that phase 4, you're about to hit marketing land phase, where you do begin to dot your I's and cross your T's and prepare for inspections and lots of, visibility, et cetera, even if you still have clients or patients on trial, because you know what's about to happen. And there's eventually a close out, but close out to me is a lot like beginning. You're trying to make sure that
It's
you've
just as
created
busy.
a foundation. You're dotting the I's and crossing the T's. The bulk is in the middle there, and catching it and documenting it in real time, so that even if you didn't do it perfectly, like even at closeout, we figure out there's something that's still just a bit of a loose thread. We have the breadcrumbs to figure it out. We're not just completely lost. You at least were recording it in real time and can get us to the information to go, okay, exactly how did this happen? And why was it documented this way? And why was it not documented this way? Okay. Now we're starting to put the puzzle pieces together. And then making sure that, you document appropriately from there. But I don't have like a particular, like I said, I like that activation, if you will, the startup, just because that's usually when people are most excited. It's usually when people are most open to like really thinking about how they're going to document and really thinking about meaningful ways to work with the team across this large repository that they have to have. But I also think that's the oncology in me talking. Like you have, in certain settings, you're going to have really particular detailed, like step by step, this is how we activate a trial. There's also a lot of settings you don't have that where, you're the reg person and you're the clinician and you're, the study coordinator and you're the bill negotiator and the whatever else is on tap. And that study side, like startup time might feel really chaotic to you. It might not feel like a time where like you want to dig in. I mean, you might just feel like you're on a bull and you're trying to hold on, which is fair. Then I would probably say, is there a way to like have preparations right before you hit that chaos to be ready for it, or to pull the templates out of the drawer and kind of have a ready state so that you don't feel so chaotic and you can at least be directing the information to the right buckets. And then after the fact, after some of the chaos subsides, presuming it does, which I know is a big presumption, then you could go back and reorganize. Because I think that's the other thing that people get really caught up in trial master file, and really any type of record keeping and documentation for compliance, is that like once you've written it down at all, like that's it. You can't in any way work with your records. And I'm not suggesting massaging anything or changing anything or backdating or anything that's unethical. What I'm saying is, yes, of course, there are Alcoa methods for how we literally record the data, initial, confirm, et cetera. But if you are doing substantial self-monitoring of your processes and your record keeping, if you do find something, say in April, that just happened in January, at least you found it while there's still institutional knowledge, there's still records, there's still people there, and you can then immediately insert whatever should have been, right, in the record, and the appropriate updated documentation to show that you didn't get it right the first time, but you self-caught and you adjusted and you corrected. And you're going to do that so much better if you do it quickly. I think there's this misnomer that like, once it's done, it's done. Like even if I found it in April, we did it. We did it in January. We're screwed. That's it. The FDA is taking us to task. And I mean, I'm not saying you can undo like enrolling in an eligible patient. I mean, you can't. You enrolled them, you subjected them to a test or a study drug. That's bad. What I am saying is if you caught why it happened once in April and got the study participant off study faster and did all your applicable reporting and documentation, then you might prevent that from happening 4 times before you caught it, right? And that's a lot more trouble and a lot more potential patient safety issue. And so that's where I think people, it's kind of like writing papers. People get so caught up on like the first line being beautiful and prosaic when it comes out of your mouth. And like, no, just put something on the page. Just type like a 2-year-old if you have to. Like just get something out there to start the juices. And like, I think the same way about the trial master file. It's okay if you have to go back and refine. It's okay if you have to go back and reorganize or adjust or frankly realize that you missed something and that now you caught it. Like that's okay. I'd rather you're doing that than not recording it at all. And guess what? That's how the FDA thinks too, and how the IRB thinks too. Like they know you're not perfect. They'd love for everyone to be, but they know you're not. They're more worried about how quickly can you catch that something's been overlooked and how quickly can you address it. And then how well do you then document that? Because I see that time and again where it's like people are so scared to even document that there was an issue in the trial master file. And it's like, no, but that's what it's there for. It's okay. Like, it's okay. Like, that's all right. No trial goes 100% according to plan. Like, that doesn't happen.
It's
and
good
so like having that understanding. Right,
Mm-hmm.
right. And honestly, I'd rather know that you have the mechanisms to catch it. I mean, yes, 100% perfect compliance is always the ideal, but knowing that we're dealing with humans and that that is not the right way to evaluate that, right, with meaningful metrics, I mean, then I think it becomes a matter truly of, okay, how can we look at this? Well, if you can quickly detect any problem and you can provide a very strong root cause analysis with a very strong CAPA, with very strong documentation, I mean, I'm not going to freak out that you have a CAPA in your trial master file. Depending on the size of the trial, I'm not going to freak out that you have 5. I mean, really, and I'd rather see it and go like, wow, they saw they had a problem. It really got down to what it was. They addressed it and it hasn't happened again. Okay, good job, guys. Obviously, if it starts happening in high numbers, we'll have to talk about it again. But assuming it doesn't, great job. I mean, that's what you want to
Or if
see.
you
You want to
didn't
see
have a
really
kappa, that would be might
right.
even be a red flag too. Like there's
Well,
no
right, exactly. And that, I mean, and I think that's where like people get really kind of scared of that level of detail, or like I said, scared that they can't redraft or that they can't refine. And you can. You don't send the first draft of your IND to the FDA. You
right.
you revise it 478 times with 87 people watching. And so I think the trial master file has some amount of that. I mean, what day the patient was onboarded, where they consented, their signature. Yes, of course, we're not suggesting you can massage things like that, but again, it's a living, breathing document. It's not
Right.
meant to be static. It's very much meant to be dynamic. And I wish folks would see it that way. I think that's part of what like gets people kind of nervous and like tingly when you talk about it. You know what I mean? Like I feel like we're always having to disarm people in compliance and record keeping. Like, one, this is exciting and you can do it for a living.
Right.
Two, like it's actually a very dynamic process. It's not nearly as stationary as you think it is.
Mm-hmm.
But they have to get into it to see that.
So let's talk about like TMF audits and like how to go about them and like how can you sort of sniff out any compliance glitches and like make things right?
Yeah. Oh, that's a huge question that I don't have all the answers to, but I'll certainly take a swing, right? The first thing I always tell people is, and this is from both sides of the fence, is like an audit really should be an educational experience. That does not mean you will never have a painful audit where something is found that blows the lid off of something and really gives you a lot to deal with. Everybody's been there. But that's not the purpose. It's not meant to be a let's get you with your pants down, let's catch you, gotcha moment. It's almost quite the opposite. Auditors, I mean, I don't know, I can't speak for all of them. Maybe some of them are sociopaths, but auditors really don't revel in finding a bunch of terrible stuff because it makes their job harder. Like that is, they're definitely not getting on a plane and going home a day early when they find a bunch of problems. And they would much rather see people succeed and that it be a routine check-in of, yep, got this, great, working on this, awesome. They know they're going to find stuff, but most of the time they really want to see an overall spirit of compliance with the appropriate documentation that shows you're following through. And they see so many different sites, either on the same trial, or maybe they're just a seasoned auditor that works across different therapeutic areas or is on contract, that they probably have some good ideas, right? So that even when they're telling you, like this was less than ideal, I'm not going to make a finding, but in the future, I'd recommend, they're probably going to have some really good ideas. And so if everyone can come to the table with a very educational and open-minded perspective, you probably actually learn a lot. I'm not saying there won't be some tense moments where, that auditor may say like, I believe this should have been in the TMF and it wasn't. And, you respectfully disagree and there is or is not a finding made there. So, I mean, you're still going to have moments that aren't going to be perfect and seamless, but it's no different than a friendship or a relationship outside of work. You don't get along all the time. And that doesn't mean that you can't still have a relationship. Rather, you recognize that you have a difference on something and you seek resolution on it. And, sometimes, yes, I understand that it can feel very much like the auditor has all the control or all the power. And so like you have to do whatever they say. But what I always try to work with if I'm in the being audited perspective, if I'm supporting like one of my sites when I was consulting during one, is help me understand what the problem actually is here. Either take me back to the regulation, take me back to why this is so important to you, show me in the SOP where we didn't follow our SOP, the sponsor SOP, and not because I'm trying to be a jerk, but because obviously I didn't find it, my people didn't find it. And if you're really hung up on it, or you're really sure that it should have been there, I mean, I want to see it so that we don't make this mistake again. And a good auditor, frankly, wants to show you because they don't want you to make this mistake again,
I
no
think
matter how
people are
large or small it
to
is.
ask,
Yeah,
like,
and I
show
get
me.
it. Like, you have to be careful. You don't want it to be
Right.
combative. Like, you don't want it to be like, well, what about this? Well, what about this? Well, what about this? So, I mean, sometimes I even just say it. I'm a very transparent speaker in the sense of like, I will literally just say, I hope you don't take this as combative. I did not know this. I am trying to learn from you in this moment. Could I ask you a few follow up questions to that point? Could you give me a better example of what you would have rather seen? What were the pieces of information, the key variables that you felt like were missing on this document that you would have rather have been in place? Was it the format of the document, where it was organized in the file? Was it a lack of confirmation by the PI? Like, just going through whatever the nature of the situation is and asking. And they don't always love it because admittedly, an auditor doesn't want to get pinned down. Like, they don't want to say, and I get where they're coming from. I've been them too, of like, if you say, well, it should have been 1 sub dot 2 sub dot 3, and then I go do that, and then a different auditor comes next year and says something different. You're like, no, no, no. They said 1 dot sub 2. What? So you don't want to be overly prescriptive in those moments. I get the reticence, but I do think that the vast majority of the time, the auditors will at least explore the topic with you. They may not sit down and give you a play-by-play, but at a bare minimum, they'll say yes. Like, the general variables you just listed are the types of variables I would have liked to have seen on the document. So they're not giving you like an exact answer in writing, but they are passing on that knowledge to you. And that's invaluable. Like, you should have scribes in the room at your audits that are taking notes of everything they're suggesting and saying. You don't have to do it all, but just be recording the heck out of that because they have good ideas. And in some settings, they are your return auditor and you know it, or they're over your return auditors and you know it. So you need to get to know them and get to know, what is the rationale behind this? Not just how do I keep them happy, but like, they have a reason that they're auditing this way. They have a reason they're really hung up on issue X or Y. So like, what is that? And a lot of times they have a story behind it. If, they have the time to really tell you, well, they'll be like, let me tell you about this thing that happened. And this is why I really make sure in my audits that, because it's true. You have those just like war story moments where either you didn't find something or something was found on your watch that you didn't know about. And you don't forget those easily. So there may actually be a life lesson that they're willing to impart on you if you can hear it. But I know that's a lot easier said than done. Tensions are high. It's nerve wracking. If you're at a high volume center, you have 400 monitors every day. You don't have time to get each one of their personal stories. Like, I get it. I do. And I just, like I said, I think that there is room there to explore that. And I would encourage folks who are either doing the auditing or undergoing the auditing to create that space to go, hey, I know I'm giving you a lot of bad feedback. Let me tell you a couple of things you did great on. And I don't see very many people do a good job with this. Or let me tell you some ways that I've seen this addressed that were really wildly successful. And you can do that without sharing overly confidential information and names and so on. As an auditor, you can be helpful in that moment. And like I said, most auditors I know at least want to. They don't want to go in and find a bunch of problems. That's not fun for them either. No one
You
wants more
actually,
paperwork.
you made a good point too. Like, if you get a room full of auditors, they're not going to have the same findings. I mean, the course will be there, but 100%, they're not going to agree on everything. And so one auditor
absolutely.
might say this, another auditor might say that, and to keep that in mind.
And that's why it's kind of like the FDA. People always go, so frustrated by this new regulation, or I'm so frustrated by this guidance because it's not prescriptive and it's not detailed and it's not getting into the granular. And I'm like, okay, hear you. Totally hear you. Yes, selfishly, in this moment, it would make our lives so much easier if it was. But then the minute you wanted to do something over here or over here or over here or over here, you'd be prevented because the language was so prescriptive and so specific. It didn't give any room to move about the cabin. And so really they did you a favor. They left it more big on purpose so that you have some room to work with, and you want that room. You don't love that room, but you want that room. You need that room. Okay. And people are always like, and I'm like, but think about it. It's the truth. And so I think of it very much the same way. Like, the TMF is not a 100% prescriptive document. You don't want it to be. You want to have a little bit of freedom to do it the way that works for your organization, the way that works for most of your agencies that audit you and that are looking over your shoulder, where you report your metrics and your data, right? So you appreciate that sort of freedom and that ability to move around. But you are going to have to acclimate to your different sponsors, your different biggest clients, your different therapeutic disease areas, whatever it is, and recognize what is the best practice in each of those to keep moving. You know what I mean? Like that to me is how you do that well. And I think there's some misnomer thought to the idea that like, as those of us in regulatory compliance, we somehow have like a secret book, like the secret FDA handbook, like what they're really going to ask you at the audit that like, or like, I know the company I'm moving to, what I say to them is like, I'm so blown away that you guys think I actually know the answers to all of your amazing questions. And they're like, but don't you have a secret handbook somewhere? And I'm like, no, you don't. You really, really don't. You just have lots and lots of experiences. And that is, I mean, part of understanding where a massive regulatory agency like an EMA or like an FDA sits on an issue or a regulation that isn't prescriptive and that does have possible different modes to its enforcement is by following what they're auditing. It is by talking to your network and finding out who's being audited and what they're focusing on. It is by going to the webinars they host. It is by reading their blogs. I mean, you are kind of stalking them a little bit to see what they're doing, and rightfully so. I mean, the FDA releases a lot of their data every year to let you know where we're finding most of our audit findings, to let you have that information so that you can read those tea leaves and decide where to put your resources. Yeah, exactly. And so it's no different when it comes to the documentation piece. It's equally as much. And I would argue actually they're focusing more on the documentation now because I saw a great presentation. It's slightly dated, but it was a great presentation a few years ago and it was by someone from the FDA, and it was talking about like, look, we make our metrics very intentionally public. And the thing we don't understand is we understood 10 years ago or 20 years ago, you put all your resources into, say, example, like IRB or regulatory or the areas where we were making all these audits. But at this particular presentation, this person was pointing, we're now down to 2% of our findings coming from that. So why are 40% of your resources still there? Like, now let's go over here to your trial master file and your documentation. 70% of our findings are now there because we know you've cleaned this up. So now we're focusing over there. So you need to move your resources where we're telling you, like, hint, hint. And so that's where it's like, okay, how do we enable our colleagues in the TMF space, whether they're there because like you and me, they enjoy it, they consult in it, they're dedicated to it, or whether they're there because they have to be, fair enough. How do we get them to a space where they're comfortable with it, where they understand the value that it brings, you know what I mean? And where they're not thinking of it as this prescriptive item anymore. And they're thinking of it like the dynamic document like we do and what it can do for you in terms of creating a record and metrics. And there's a lot of data there that you can do a lot of great work and analysis with long-term from a business development perspective, even for your site, if you're smart about it. So, really extrapolating and using it for all of its worth. I know we're coming up on time. I was trying to cut myself off.
Let's talk training. So what role does training and education play in promoting TMF compliance among research staff? And how do you design that effective training programs to address compliance issues?
Yeah, great question. So many answers. So I am a firm believer in training. It's not everything. It's not every piece of the pie. But man, train. Go try, train some more, go try, go train some more, try, right? There's an iterative process there that is really, truly critical, I think, to anyone. So much of what we do, because we are in an industry that's just unique in how it's set up and how you actually even reach the industry, if you will. I think that you have to be mindful that folks may or may not come in with any training, right? And that training could be a variety of different things. It could just be their experiences that have happened on the job. It could be formal training, now that we really do have like regulatory affairs, masters, and job tracks. So it could be a variety of things. So it's incredibly important, one. Two, you got to get a read of the room. Where are you at? You don't want to be giving rudimentary training to folks who definitely know what they're doing. But also, usually you have a room of mixed nuts, right? Where like some have been doing this for 20 years and some have been doing it for 20 minutes, and you've got to strike some type of a balance. So I definitely tell people, don't hesitate to do fractional or like tiered training in your organizations. Make sure you're very sensitive to those that may have less knowledge, to make sure that they don't feel in any way like they're being taught remedial. Rather, you're trying to empower them to really be on board and have digested the information. So when you move to that next step with the whole team, they don't feel left behind and they don't feel like they're being talked over their head. You know what I mean? It's really meant to help them. And then you got to get in there and actually do it. Now, I am all for being smart about training, having pre-recorded items, outsourcing to commercially available resources, but I'm also super snotty about it. And I say this not because I actually have any TMF modules in the space, rather because there's a lot of super crappy training out there. I mean, like really, really crappy. And some of it, frankly, is some of the most endorsed expensive stuff out there. And I'm just not a fan. I think that at a minimum, you need something that really speaks to your particular team and your particular needs at your organization. That's very hard to get off of a shelf. If you want to do a very base level, introductory training, like what even is HIPAA? What even is human subjects protections? Completely understand doing it that way and then customizing into your organization. But there has to be some step in training between the off-the-shelf model and the what actually gets implemented model, or it will not be a profound training experience.
Mm-hmm.
And then you will see a host of compliance problems that will come after that. And then you will say, oh, we retrained. And then nothing will actually get better.
Check.
And yeah, I can't say enough about training. It's not, like I said, it's not everything. You got to go out there and do it. You got to fail forward. You got to actually try it all on. But it certainly builds a core. And when I talk to people about their jobs, like when you're doing a root cause analysis and you're like, wait, so you always record it this way? Where did you ever learn to record it this way? Who taught you how to do this? Nobody. I never had any training. So I've just been doing it this way for 10 years. Nobody ever told me otherwise. It's always what I hear. So that's where I'm like, training. Like, training.
Right.
We're creating our own problems.
Mm-hmm. So you attend a lot of conferences. Can you just share with us what are some emerging trends or developments in research compliance, particularly concerning the TMF, that organizations should be aware of?
I'm not thinking of anything like regulatorily off the top of my head, unless there's something you're thinking of that I go like, okay, this is really changing in the industry right now, or this is really going to change how we document. I am very interested, like I said, truly to see and hear what AI and some of the technology platforms are, where they're going to go with this information, because you're seeing it get applied almost everywhere that you can think of. You're seeing it in contracts. You're starting to see it in budgets. You're seeing it in different technology platforms. You're seeing it in recruitment. I don't know if it's one of those, they don't think it's like, they think everybody else has an application for this. Maybe there's not enough money in it, that hasn't been explored more. But at any rate, I can't imagine it wouldn't eventually hit the waves there. Do you know what I mean? People love to throw in the regulatory hiccup and say like, oh, well, will the FDA be okay with that? I really don't think, I shouldn't say this because I'm not the FDA, but I don't think the FDA cares. As long as they're still receiving the quality information about the test article at hand and it's being reported the right way, I'm not really sure they're going to care if it was an AI that set up your TMF and triaged it or not. Because I could see some great value either in just an ease and organization, where like you literally from different sites and different spots could be sending the model different levels of documentation and it could be collating for you. I could also see there being a real value in an AI generated review at the end of your research to go like, check my whole trial master file, check for certain consistencies, check for certain documentation, check that I had this in there, check that I have this, check that this source document, or whatever it is you're worried about, have it go through and do that for you. So it could actually improve the quality. So that's an interesting one. What I will be interested to track and see is if there are any notable changes, whether it's outright from the FDA or just from enforcement, once we get our finalized decentralized trial guidance and once we have all of our finalized diversity mapping guidance. Like at that point, when those are in play, will we change what is recorded in the trial master file based on the new guidance on how a hybrid trial works and what's expected to be documented where and what's not, like between the healthcare provider and the research staff, as well as the other. Those I'm keeping an eye on just because I think it'll change what we document and how we document it. It won't like upend the TMF, but it's going to change and add a section. It's going to add expected documentation. So I do think that's on the horizon. It's not like a change to the reg. It's just a change to the enforcement,
Right. So I've got two questions that I ask every guest. And the first one is, what's the best career advice you've received and who is it from?
Oh, That's a really good one, man. I think there's two classes of advice. There's the advice that is the kind that gets you through the day when you've had a bad one. And then there's the kind of advice that is like the inspiring advice, right? And the inspiring advice would be never say die. It's a saying that my dad has, and he would write it on these cards when I was growing up that he would give me. And I have all these inspirational little quotes and sayings around my office that he would give me. And at the end, they all have these different poems, these different ways of saying it. But like at the end, it was always like, never say die, never say die. And it was just, that kind of tried and true advice of like, it's okay to get upset. It's okay to even give up for an hour or give up for a day or put it in the back burner for a minute, but don't actually say die, don't actually give up. And I think that resiliency is just critical in any type of healthcare, let alone clinical trials work, and especially compliance. The tongue in cheek, I was having a very bad day very early in my career, very early on. And someone at the time who I was dating, who was not my husband, said, Edye, you're just going on and on and on today about like, wow, you had a bad day. And I'm like, I don't have bad days like this at work. What do you want me to say? And he said, I'll never forget, he goes, sometimes you're the plane and sometimes you're the runway. Today you were the runway. Move on. And it was the quickness with which he was just like, yeah, today sucks. It won't always be a great day. Move on. It always stuck with me in a way. You know what I mean? Like there's definitely times where I think that's a little bit light-handed response to the situation at hand with what we do. But I get the point of it, which is there are some days that aren't going to be tens and you are going to have to swallow that. And those of us who are in this industry are usually in it because we're perfectionists and we're crazy about what we do. And so the idea of it not being a 10 and not being perfect is a very, very, scary thought. It's kind of like what you're talking about, the trial master file being perfect and not being able to be changed or updated. So that's resiliency coupled with the fact that, there's going to be some rough days and you're going to have to dust yourself off.
And lastly, what's your favorite trial master file document and why?
I knew you were going to ask me this. And I was like, I bet everyone thinks that I'm going to say informed consent because I miss like research ethics and so on. But I think the lawyers, my own people have totally screwed up informed consent in ways that I cannot even begin to go on and on. I'm going to very selfishly and very foreshadowingly say, I think that it is the background information that I was talking about at the beginning of the trial master file, very specifically around regulatory approvals, licensees, and what you would think of as like the heaviest lift, like the IND, for example. It's taken for granted as being one of the heaviest lifts to open the giant metal door to the clinical trial critical path, right? And I think it gets skipped because we get so into what happens the rest of the TMF that we forget how important those pieces are and how they shape the rest of the TMF and how it sets the stage for them, even though it's just a piece of documentation. You know what I mean at that point. What about yours?
No, it's not just a piece of documentation. It's so much more.
I know, right? I know. This is why you and I get along, because we both agree.
All right. Where can everybody learn more about you?
Yes. So you are welcome to go to www.weave.bio. So that is the new company that I'll be working with. And you can email me at Edye, Edye, @weave.bio. And then, of course, LinkedIn. Always on LinkedIn, not going anywhere.
Well, Edye, I enjoyed our conversation so much. And thank you for joining me on the TMF Daily Podcast.
Thank you for having me.